Greetings of the day. This is Pauline VN from the Department of English, Kristu Jayanti College. In this video, I will be talking about the important incidents of the Victorian age. The Victorian period. Victorians thought of themselves living in a time of great change, growth, prosperity, and progress. The Victorian period. The Victorian era of British history was the period of Queen Victoria's reign from 1837 until her death in 1901. It was a long period of peace, prosperity, refined culture, great advancements in technology, and national self-confidence for Britain. During the Victorian age, Britain was the world's most powerful nation. By the end of Victoria's reign, the British Empire extended over about 1/5 of the Earth's surface. Like Elizabethan England, Victorian England saw great expansion of wealth, power, and culture. Victorian England was a time of great ambition. Social and cultural context. The Industrial Revolution. The impact of the Industrial Revolution resulted in the emergence of overcrowded cities and child labor. Literature was based on social protest, and the genres were the Victorian novel, poetry, and drama. The British Empire. Queen Victoria ruled over a vast and expanding empire over which it was said the sun never set. The British considered the empire as a means of fulfilling the white man's mission of civilizing the nations under their control, spreading Western values throughout the whole world. The Industrial Revolution. It started at the end of the 18th century when theoretical knowledge and practical technology were connected. Scientific ideas were applied to the making of machines that transformed the way things were made and dramatically changed people's lifestyles. A formerly agricultural nation was now based on urban and industrial growth. As industry grew, it was accompanied by a rapid increase in the numbers of the urban working class poor. Workers in the cities lived in miserable conditions. Urban squalor and misery were signs of a massive change in the English society. The impact of Industrial Revolution. The emergence of overcrowded cities, result of the advancement of technology, was the unprecedented growth of cities. People in search of work left the countryside to work in factories in the different cities of Britain. They had to live in very dirty and unhealthy conditions. There were too many workers and not enough houses. People were living like animals. Diseases raged, hunger, poverty, and deprivation prevailed, crime accelerated, and misery increased. It was the time of the world's first industrial revolution, political reform, and social change. Railways were getting popular, and the first telephone and telegraph system started. But the Victorians also saw a demise of rural life as cities rapidly grew and expanded. Long and regimented factory hours and the start of the Crimean War disrupted the peace. The Crimean War was fought mainly on the Crimean Peninsula between Russia and Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire. Peace and economic growth. Empire grew steadily until 1900, and it expanded over India and North America. Queen Victoria was the ruler of more than 200 million people outside Britain. The Hungry 40s. The first decade of Queen Victoria's reign, though, was troubled. She came to the throne in the first year of a depression. 1.5 million unemployed workers were on some form of relief. The potato blight or the potato famine. Ireland faced potato blight, and it caused a famine that killed 1 million and forced 2 million to emigrate. Some went to England, caused severe overcrowding in the cities. The crop failures were caused by a blight, a disease that left the leaves and the edible roots of the tubers of the potato unproductive. The Hungry 40s. Poor working conditions. Government commissions investigated poor working conditions. Children were mangled at missions when they fell asleep at the end of 12-hour work days. Children hauled coal in the mines. Pollution and filth. Rapid growth of the cities led to filthy and disorderly streets. Major cities were expanding because of industry. Streets were unpaved. Thames River was polluted with sewage, industrial waste, and drainage from graveyards. The economic growth. Industrial revolution expanded rapidly. New towns, new goods, new wealth, and new jobs for people maneuvering through levels of the middle class. Middle class and working class politicians and voters achieved political power while leaving the monarchy and aristocracy in place. Child labor. Children were expected to help to support their families. They often worked long hours in dangerous jobs and in difficult situations for every little wages. For example, there were climbing boys employed by the chimney sweeps, the little children who could scramble under the moving machinery to retrieve the cotton fluff, boys and girls working down the coal mines, crawling through tunnels too narrow and low to take an adult. Cultural context. Adam Smith's economic ideas had great influence on Victorian thinking. In his book, The Wealth of Nations, it advocated free trade and believed that the market is best left untouched. Government intervention only prevents the economy from righting itself. He therefore strongly opposed any government interference with business affairs. He was against trade restrictions and minimum wage laws as being harmful to a nation's economy. The policy of government non-intervention remained popular throughout the Victorian era. Charles Darwin. Darwin's theory of evolution, proposed in his book The Origin of Species, has transformed the way we think about the natural world. The book was extremely controversial because it implied that man was simply another form of animal and that people might have evolved from apes. Darwin was strongly attacked, particularly by the church. The theory of evolution led to a crisis of faith and spiritual doubt among so many people. Intellectual progress, the march of the mind. Humans began to understand more about the earth, its creatures, and natural laws. Charles Darwin, Evolution of Species, Technology, Chemistry, and Engineering aided with the industrial movement. John Stuart Mill. He was a champion of individual rights, which he enforced in his book on liberty, and a pioneer of women's rights in the subjection of women. Mill attacked the tyranny of the majority who would deny liberty to individuals through public opinion. The movement for reform, food factories and optimism. Violence and massive political rallies took place to protest government policies that kept the price of food high and deprived most working men of the vote and representation in parliament. Political reformers organized a protest. Improvements in diet. Mid-century, price of food dropped because of increased trade with other countries and the growing empire. Diet improved. Meat, food, fruit and margarine was available to working class households. Factories and railroads made items and services cheap. Movements of reform. Florence Nightingale transformed public's perception and she was a nurse. Reform hospital management. Octavia Hill became an authority on housing reform. Octavia Hill was an English social reformer whose main concern was the welfare of the inhabitants of cities, especially London, in the second half of the 19th century, believed the adequate housing could make individual life noble, homes happy, and family life good. Movements in reform. Reform bills. Almost all adult males got to vote by the last decades of the century. First Reform Act. All men who owned property worth £10 or more in yearly rent could vote. Second Reform Act. Right to vote to most working class men except for farm workers. Women aged 30 and over won the right. Women aged 20 and over from 1921 were allowed to vote. Factory Acts limited child labor and reduced usual working to 10 hours with half-day holiday on Saturday. State-supported schools established. Blushing cheeks and decorum and prudery. Middle-class obsession with social superiority or decorum. Censored books, magazines of things, and could bring a blush to the cheek. In fiction, sex, birth, and death were softened into tender courtships, joyous motherhoods, and deathbed scenes in which old people were saints and babies were angels. Authoritarian values. Family. Autocratic father of middle-class households in both fact and fiction were promoted. Women were subject to male authority. Women married to make comfortable homes as a refuge for their husbands to escape the male dominion of business. Few occupations for unmarried women were, in the case of working class, they served as servants in wealthy homes. In middle class families, they served as governesses and teachers, whereas unmarried women had a painful, difficult life. Prudery and social control. It used to control immorality and sexual excess associated with violent political revolutions of the 18th century and social corruption of Regency of George IV. Questions and doubts. Victorians questioned the cost of exploiting the earth and human beings to achieve material comfort, protested or mocked codes of decorum and authority. The idea of progress. Thomas Babington Macaulay voiced middle-class Victorian attitude. Victorians had confidence that all social and material problems can be solved by progress. Thomas Babington Macaulay, or Baron Macaulay, was born on 1800. He was an English Whig politician, essayist, and poet. At age 8, he wrote a compendium of universal history and also the Battle of Chivot. Next comes Charles Dickens, who was most popular and important figure in the Victorian literature. Thanks to the high literacy rate, son of a debt-ridden clerk, but due to his talents and energy rose from poverty to become a wealthy and famous man. Mr. Dickens, his books had happy endings, but many characters were neglected, abused, and exploited. So I've given few books where you can see things about child labor and also the Industrial Revolution. Elizabeth Gaskell Stevenson was one of the famous women writers of the period. There are details about her in this slide. George Eliot. She was a leading Victorian novelist, translator, journalist, and poet. Her major well-known novels were The Mill on the Floss, Middlemarch, Felix Holt, The Radical, and many more. Thomas Hardy remains one of the great novelists of the Victorian age, known for his many novels, short stories, and poems. His famous works are Far from the Madding Crowd, The Poor Man and the Lady, The Return of the Native, The Woodlanders, A Pair of Blue Eyes, The Mayor of Casterbridge, etc. William Makepeace Thackeray was born in India, where his father served in the British East India Company. His first major novel was The Luck of Barry Lyndon. He is probably best known for Vanity Fair. Alfred Lord Tennyson, he was a student of King Edward VI Grammar School, Louth. He entered Trinity College, Cambridge in 1827. There he met Arthur Hallam. Tennyson's first collection of poetry poems, chiefly lyrical, were published in 1830. Tennyson's major works are Break, 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 The Charge of the Light Brigade, Tears, Idle Tears, Crossing the Bar, Ulysses in Memoriam AHH, where he talks about his friend Arthur Henry Hallam, Idylls of the King, Tithonus, etc. Robert Browning, he was born in Camberwell, England. He was a master of monologue. Browning started writing poetry at the age of 12. Some of his poems are The Ring and the Book, Dramatis Personae, Dramatic Lyrics, Dramatic Romances and Lyrics, My Last Duchess, etc. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, she didn't receive any formal education and was educated at home with her siblings. Her collection of poems was published in 1838. Her major works are Sonnet 24, How Do I Love Thee, The Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point, The Cry of the Children, A Musical Instrument, etc. Matthew Arnold, he was an English poet and cultural critic. He was elected professor of poetry at Oxford in 1857, and he was the first in this position to deliver his lectures in English rather than in Latin. His famous works are The Forsaken Merman, To a Friend, The Buried Life, A Wish Growing Old, Rugby Chapel, East London, etc. Gerard Manley Hopkins, whose posthumous fame established him among the leading Victorian poets. His concept of sprung rhythm established him as an innovative writer of verse and did his technique of praising God through vivid use of imagery and nature. Famous playwrights of the era are Henry Arthur Jones, Sir Arthur Wing Pinero, Oscar Finnegal O'Flaherty, Wilde or Oscar Wilde was an Irish poet and playwright. After writing in different forms throughout the 1880s, the early 1890s saw him become one of the most popular playwrights in London. George Bernard Shaw, an Irish playwright, critic, and polemist and political activist. He wrote more than 60 plays, including major works such as Man and Superman and St. John. Shaw became the leading dramatist of his generation and in 1925 was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Thank you all.